Hello and welcome to episode 6 of our Cinema 4D Basics introduction tutorial. Today we're going to be covering spline modeling. So far we've covered the viewport navigation, we've covered basics of graphic user interface setup and screen customization. We've covered primitives, booleans and basic lighting techniques, introduced the volume builder based off the back of the primitives and the booleans, and also we've had a little look at how the materials library and the object library interact with each other and the relevance of that. So today I'm going to cover obviously the spline modeling thing. Now the interesting thing about spline modeling in Cinema 4D is, let's just close these so I'll show you how to get them. All right, so we'll use the tear off strips here, which I covered in another tutorial rather unsuccessfully because I hadn't set my screen recording software up properly. And we're going to go down here as well. So we'll just drag those over here. And the interesting thing about this is the subdivision surface used to be grouped in here with these guys. And the reason for that is because basically it's all kind of spline modeling. Subdivision surface used to be called NURBS, which stands for non-uniform rational B-spline. And obviously, from a software perspective, it would convert the geometry to splines. But as kind of time went on, it made sense to put it in with the more geometry-based stuff. So, like the subdivision surface now it always has done, relies on a geometry-based control cage, which I will explain what that means in a minute. These ones are like they kind of rely directly on spline data in order to kind of extrude, lathe it, loft it, and sweep it, respectively. So I'm going to start off with a subdivision surface object, and as you can see here, there's nothing here apart from almost looks like a null object. So what we need to do is stick some geometry in there, and for the purposes of this tutorial, I think we'll just cover, just kind of make some abstract vase-y type shapes. It'll be the best way to kind of, we're not trying to make something here, I'm just trying to show you how it works. So we don't need to really have an end goal in sight. So what we're going to do is stick some geometry in here. Now, the best thing to do for a kind of abstract vase type thing is just use a cylinder. So if we press O on the keyboard, we can zoom right into that. And you can see here I have my cylinder. Now, because it's subdivision, I obviously don't want to be subdividing all of this geometry. So I'm going to simplify it right down. Let me just move these guys out of the way. I'll stick them over here because we're not using our materials panel. So what I'll do is we need to reduce the height segments to 1. Just get rid of those ones, see here. And now we'll reduce our rotation segments to 8. And that will give us a nice little cage to create our subdivisions with. So in order to create a subdivided model, we obviously need to drop the cylinder into the subdivision surface object, which is here. And now we've got this kind of weird capsule shape. So the idea of this is that you it's kind of like, obviously, with Cinema 4D, when I explained how to do booleans and the volume builder, that was kind of like non-destructive parametric-based modeling, whereas subdivision surface modeling, and NURBS as I like to call it, but if I do say NURBS, that's what I mean, it tends to be more, not destructive per se, but it's more solidified almost. You know, once you've done something, you have to like alter the geometry to change it again. So what we need to do is we need to edit this, or make this cylinder editable, using the C key. And now, if I press Q on the keyboard, it toggles the subdivision surface on and off. That's a useful little keyboard shortcut. So, obviously, as we're working here with kind of like a circular kind of shape, it makes sense if we go into our mesh, and if we go to the cut menu. Now, this is obviously grayed out because I've selected the object tool here. So if we go to the edge tool, edge mode, object mode, texture mode, point mode, edge mode, and polygon mode. Let's have a quick little cover of those first. So this basically selects your polygons. This selects your edges, like this. This selects your points. And this, if we did have a texture on it, would select textures, but we're going to cover textures in a later tutorial. So for now, I'm just going to use the edge selection tool. And let me just rip this off. Okay, so this here is your recent tools menu. So if we can rip this off and just have it over here. It's really handy. We're going to go to the mesh, and now we should see our loop cut tool, loop or path cut. We've got different options here. We're going to use this one for here. And okay, so you can see here it's giving me the option to cut the geometry where I need to cut it. So it's like I need to. Okay, so first UO optimize. Okay, so maybe whenever you make an object editable by either pressing C or right clicking and going to make object editable, which is grayed out now because it is editable. A good thing to do is just press U and then O on the keyboard, and O, we look here, it goes optimize. So U O optimizes our geometry. Normally what you have to do is select all your points like that, and that just, if there's any kind of separated edges or anything like that, then you can it seals them up and gives you a solid single object. So that's what we want. So back here to the edge cut tool. All right, so we have our options here to cut the geometry. Let's see what happens, and we can do it kind of here at the top as well. Now let's see what happens to our subdivision surface object, or subdivided object, if I could speak, when we cut the geometry. So obviously the idea of this control cage is that it is an average of all the points kind of inside it. It's a bit like the pen tool in Adobe Illustrator, which I'll probably cover the Illustrator tutorials later on in life when I get a bit more bored. So click here and you see how it's changed the geometry. It's tightened up the curves there. And so we have our strange little vase type thing. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the polygon selection tool and select the polygons on the base. These ones down here. If I just hit Q, okay, and now hit Q again. And what we can do is, I'm just going to make that a bit smaller so we kind of have that weird cup shape. And that, you know what I can do as well? I will make it so that it kind of has a little standy-uppy base thing, because that would make sense. I'm not going to, like I said, this is going to be more of an abstract thing, but why not, you know? Why not? So let's get rid of that. Right, so we just want to use our loop and path cut here, and then do another one here, I think. Oh no, let's just leave it for now. And we go into our edge selection mode. Edge is already selected, which is cool. And hit Q and hit T for scale. And we'll scale it this way. So if these little ones here, like they'll scale it in one direction only, or you can do this, and this as well. But you have a little play with that because it's fascinating. So this will give us a little base here. So we've got quite a tight quite a tight curve here, you see, right there. So obviously that's reflected in the geometry. We can increase our subdivisions as well if we want to, so we can probably increase that to 3, and we'll get a little bit of a more rounded curve, or even 4. And this will be the render. So the viewport and the render have different settings, as you will find in a lot of Cinema 4D. And the viewport is obviously this. So I've increased the number of viewport subdivisions. Just to bear in mind, if you are increasing the number of subdivisions in the renderer, it does increase the render time. It depends on the nature of your scene, how much it will increase it by, but it can do that. So just back to our vase, let's just hit Q again. Right, so what I'll do is I will use my loop selection tool here. And you always get your little keyboard shortcut next to them if it has one, so there you go. And let's go to here. And these are, so basically, right, it depends on where you make contact with the model when you're using this tool, but you know, you can select the loops as in a loop all the way around like that, or you can select the loop like that. So I'm going to use, if I hit these ones here, that'll give me that option, and if I hit the one at the top, it'll give me the loop more like wrapped around the whole thing. So let's do this one. I'll hold shift and select these and select these. And so the idea in this is I'm going to make this a bit bigger. So I'm going to scale it using the scale function and make that big like that. So you've got a little flower potty type vase thing going on here. And so I'm going to deselect these polygons and reselect this one. I'm going to make this bigger. And that'll increase the tightness of that radius at the top there. So I have to be careful not to make it too sharp, because you know you might not want that. It's all about being in control of it. And then if I hit E to give me my movement tool again, you can see it's is kind of changing the shape of the object, and that's basically just doing that, you see. And so what we can do if we want to create like an actual vase shape where I can stick stuff in it, the best thing to do is that I can highlight this axis, and if I hold the command key, it will kind of like create a not a duplicate, but it'll kind of give me an extra bit of geometry. So you see here, I'm holding Control or holding Command. I could be Control on a PC, but I'm on a Mac. And then yeah, you can kind of see your little bowl shape happening here. Now, if I go NG to see my geometry, I can see whether I'm going to intersect with myself. You see, you have to be wary of that. So if I can scale that down a little bit, I can, you know, we've got our nice vase shape type thing going on. So that is how we do it in the subdivision surface object. Okay, now if we just NA back into geometry mode, and oh no, I don't want to save. I trust Cinema 4D not to crash. You know, I'm not going to save this. We do have some funky geometry happening here, where these haven't quite. You know, there's something going on there. That's subdivision surface modeling for you. Will get that sometimes. They're kind of like pinch points. I'm not gonna get rid of them right now, but it's just something to bear in mind. See, when you're modeling, because you can get like funny little artifacts like that. And a lot of times, you know, it's worth just being super tight with your geometry. But obviously, as this is a beginner's tutorial, we're not going to cover too much of that. So here you go. Here's your bowl shape. I mean, the thing to bear in mind as well is that you have to evaluate whether it's worth spending time on, because if no one's going to see this, it's not worth spending time fixing it. So no one's going to see it. I'm not going to fix it. I will cover at some point, maybe in a more advanced tutorial, I'll cover how to kind of get around those geometry pinches. It's just when the geometry gets a little bit too tight for the subdivision and it kind of starts to kink itself. But yeah, like I said, I mean, it's just not worth covering right now. So we will leave the subdivision surface model there just as it's a decent enough introduction, and we'll try a different type of model. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this over here. And where's my X? So if I just move it sideways there. And the next thing we'll be covering is the Extrude. Now, I normally make my splines in Adobe Illustrator, but for the sake of the Extrude tool, I'll just show you how to do it quickly on using the Spline tool. The Spline, excuse me. The Spline tools in Cinema 4D they're kind of okay. The one I use the most is the helix, because that's very difficult to replicate in Cinema 4D. But for something like an arc or a circle, you can use these tools. If I'm doing something a bit more advanced, like I'll show you in a minute when I come to the Lathe tool, I'll make the spline in Illustrator. Well, I've made one already, to be fair, so we'll sort that out in a second. But for now, we'll just cover the extrude. So we'll make a little extrude object. Here we go. And obviously that, again, because it's spline-based geometry, it's waiting for some geometry it's waiting for a spline to turn into geometry. So it's different to the subdivision surface, where the subdivision surface obviously uses like actual three-dimensional geometry. These ones tend to use two-dimensional splines. So if I just create a circle, okay, and then I'll drop the circle into the extrude, and that'll do something like that. I'll just scale the whole thing down. You can see the extrude is just when you make something like give it an extra dimension. And so that circle is now a cylinder because I've hit the extrude. The extrude tool obviously lets you fillet the caps as well. And so yeah, we can have like caps and stuff just to kind of take, you know, if we just do it like a really subtle, like, you know, whatever this is, like 2.8 mil, just to kind of make it not so sharp, because you don't really want your edges too sharp if you can help it. So that's the extrude tool. You wouldn't really use the extrude tool to make a vase type shape, so we just leave it as a cylinder for now. I mean, there is obviously a cylinder tool as a primitive, but you know, if you had, for instance, this flower shape or the cogwheel's a pretty good one. So let's get rid of you. Where's my delete key gone? And we'll pop the cogwheel in. Now, there you go. You know, you have a nice cogwheel type thing that you could make, you know, machine parts out of, or whatever you need. And so yeah, now that's the extrude tool. I use it all the time. It's a really, really powerful tool. It's so simple. It's amazing how powerful it is and useful it is compared to how simple it is. So we'll move that to one side and move you over there. So the next thing is the lathe tool. I use it a lot because where I do pack shots and pack renders, I make my geometry in Illustrator. So anyway, the next thing we're going to cover is the lathe tool. So if we just click our lathe tool here, you can see here we've got a lathe object. So we need some geometry to put into that. We can use some of the spline options here. So yeah, sorry, spline is still geometry, but I tend to refer to polygonal geometry as geometry. But yeah, we can use a lathe tool. A lathe tool kind of spins stuff around like a lathe you would cut wood on or whatever. So none of these splines are really particularly going to work here. So what I'm going to do is let's go into Adobe Illustrator and I'll show you a spline I made earlier. Command Y activates your spline view in Illustrator. So if we just take this, what you need to do in Illustrator, Cinema 4D will import Illustrator, you can call it geometry, I guess, splines. It will import them natively, but what I tend to do is I tend to save them as Illustrator 8. Let me just make sure you can see that. Okay. So Adobe Illustrator, there we go, save that. Okay, I'm just going to replace that for the purposes of showing you. And all the way down to Illustrator 8, it just gets rid of a lot of the metadata and stuff that you might get in the way. So we closed Illustrator. I'm going to go back into Cinema 4D. And now we're going to just drag the spline in. You can drag it onto the icon in the dock. Sometimes that can cause Cinema 4D to crash if it's not already open. But here's the... Okay, so Illustrator 8 import settings. You have the options to group them, connect them, and there is it should be a single spline. If it's not, I'll have to just delete something. But yeah, we should have a single spline here. So this is our spline. So let's take this, let's see if we close the spline. Yeah, okay, so basically if you uncheck close spline, I've drawn it so that this was deliberately left open. I don't know if you remember from looking when I went into spline mode a moment ago in Illustrator itself, you can see that there was not a connection here. The reason for that is because we're going to use it with a lathe object that would create extra kind of stuff we don't want. So the thing to do with these, right, you need to press either L on the keyboard or you go over here to your enable axis modification tool, and we'll just drag this down here because obviously we're going to be spinning around this point here. So the best thing to do, if we go into mode, modeling, and then we'll snap, and then we can snap to a point. So that'll give us the ability to snap to a point here. Now zoom right in just to make sure it's snapped dead to that point. And now I'm going to just snap to this point because that's probably a better one. So we'll go right up here. I'm going to press L again because I've moved my thing. Now I have the ability to move the entire object, which is pretty awesome. And I'm going to just take this and paste it in here. And you can see this is a little bit smaller than the other one, so I'm just going to scale it up, and it'll scale from that point. Everything it'll do now is that's the axis point it's going to work from. I'm going to go into my orthographic view, make sure that it is kind of in line with everything, which it kind of is. I mean, that's where the extrude begins. That's where the NURBS object was centered. So here this is going to be centered too. And now once I drop my spline into my lathe, let's make sure my lathe tool, let's see, well, I might have to line these up, but actually, I might as well line it up now. Okay, let's go in here. Now, am I snapping to anything? Okay, you see 3D can be a real bugger because you think you're next to something and you're not. I would love it, right, if you could use 3D goggles, like Google Glass and that kind of, not Google Glass, an Apple thing. It'd be cool if you could actually have depth perception in 3D software. That'd be amazing. But anyway, let's drop the spline into the lathe. You can see here now we've made another kind of VASI type thing. Obviously we have lathe options, which are, we want to have, we've got various options, like they kind of, I don't want to go into too much. You can just click on them and stuff will happen. And if it doesn't, then you don't need it. Yeah, let's not beat around the bush too much. But obviously we've got our bevels. We can kind of bevel it, but as we don't really have any kind of like really sharp edges, the bevel's not necessary. Right now we have so we can do all sorts of funky stuff with this. See my spline? You can move it around and kind of you can make a helix type thing out of this as well. That's another way of making a helix, which I won't go into now, but I'll show you how to make a helix in another video. You can make a spring shape. So yeah, your lathe is very versatile. Obviously you can create sections. You can see now I've got a bit of tessellation and artifacting going on in the middle there. That's because it's not quite lined up properly. And so this is obviously something we'd have to fix, really, because we, you know, if for any reason you needed it to be. So you can see what happens here. So basically, what happens is it starts to tessellate when the geometry kind of overlaps with itself on the same plane. And so ideally, we want to just bring this as small as we can get. You can see here where it's not quite lined up. I mean, you can just get it as tight as you can. I mean, a small hole is acceptable unless you're 3D printing, but you know, so just tiny little gap there. That'll do us for now. Again, I don't want to kind of go too much in depth because it will defeat the object of the beginner's tutorial. This will get you going if you need to start in a hurry. So we have our lathe tool here with this is just the angle of the sweep. Because it is kind of a sweep. I mean, there's a sweep object as well, but the lathe is kind of a sweep. It's just a different type of sweep. And we have also, we cover the movement. That kind of does the opposite of the movement. It just kind of scales one end, and it'll make it bigger, like a snail shell type effect. And so obviously we want our subdivisions to be a bit more than 32 if we're going to do anything serious with this. But you can make it like this as well, and you could probably make that editable and use it as a subdivision object if you wanted. Not sure what effects you'd get then, but you know, just for the purposes of making a pottery pot like we've done with the others. Here is our lathe object. So that's that covered. So the next thing we're going to cover, let's move over there. The next thing we're going to cover is the loft object. So the loft object it's a funny one actually, because it works. You need a couple of splines to make it work, and you can kind of make it like, it's kind of cool actually, because I used it once to make a kind of a chocolate drizzle on top of a chocolate bar once, because you can kind of mess around with it. But if I put the circle into the loft object, we just end up with a disc, and the reason for that is we need to copy and paste the circle. Now what I like to do, instead of copying and pasting circles, I like to work a bit more hands-on. So I'll hold the command key, and then this will happen. And so we can do all sorts of crazy stuff. So if I then, I think I can make these editable. And now I've just got myself a spline. Now I can do other stuff with it, see? So that's how that works. And then if I copy that again, make that a bit bigger, you see how it's kind of subdividing, you know, all along. And that's what the loft object does. Really handy thing actually, because you know, you're starting to resemble a kind of a human arm. But you know, obviously, like if I was to undo all this and just kind of make my circle to be like flat on the floor, I could do that, and then we'll get another vase. Because that's, you know, I don't want to lose focus of the vases. The vases are important. So we'll do this and make it kind of like that, and we'll just scale it up a bit again and hold command, make some more geometry, and then we'll hold command again. And then we'll bring this in a bit, and you can bring it back on itself, and you can kind of create your geometry that way. So that's pretty groovy, and it's a lot like the other one as well. I mean, you can increase the amount of subdivisions here, and obviously, you know, you can create there. You end up with monstrous amounts of geometry, so be careful with that, because you can crash the software doing it if you give it too much data to process, but also it can slow it down a lot. So it's just a bit of optimization as opposed to what your rig's like. So this is why you get all these options. You know, if you're on a kind of a Intel 486, you might want it like that, you know. But on a half decent computer, it should handle it. And if you're doing 3D on a really crap computer, I would suggest investing in a good one. It'll just save you a lot of hassle. So yeah, and you can see here where all the circles are. You can turn this off with the Q key, as you can with all of these. Just hitting Q there to turn that on and off, and there's your loft knobs, and we've got our little kind of pestle and mortar type vase type thing there, which is great. Let me just put that down there. And the next one will be the sweep. The sweep is another one that does, you know, spline modeling. And to create our sweep, we'll create our sweep object. So we'll have a sweep object in here. We'll see, you can use it there. I've got it down here as well. And then that's it kind of. The sweep object is, you know, the idea of the sweep object is that you can create an intersection along a spline, and it sweeps it along. So here we have if we just like use a couple of circles, you got to fettle it a little bit to get it working, but you know, because obviously here, So you've got two circles, and like you can imagine, like this is like a donut shape. So if I make one smaller, you see there's your sweep. We can't really make a vase out of sweeps, unfortunately, which I'm disappointed by. I really am. But your sweep is kind of that. So if we turn one off, you'll just still have your circle, and you'll have see. So it's basically like you're sweeping one around the other. If we were to do that, you have a weird one. So it's an AB thing, like the Boolean. So there you go. You have the sweep there, but obviously you don't just have to use circles. Let's just turn this off. See what we're left with. So if I swap that out, okay, I've got my large circle left. If I say I wanted to sweep a square or a rectangle around it, I just make that small and drag it in there, and then we have a rectangle sweep, like making a kind of a washer type shape or whatever if you're mechanically inclined. And also, you can do other cool stuff as well. You can use it, stick a flower in it and make a flower small because that'll just look bonkers otherwise. And you can kind of got this flowery type shape, so you can do some creative stuff with the sweep. And obviously, you want to create your it's part of Subdivision, but the should have the obviously parallel movement can be useful. We're not going to cover it too much now. But yeah, as you can see by checking on and checking here, you're affecting geometry in different ways. The default settings are a good one to use on this, unless you're kind of getting heavily into it. But in general, it's a pretty decent little tool to have. End scale, so you can kind of like see the start and end scale here. You can kind of mess around with that if you want. You can rotate the start and the end, which is quite handy. But obviously, if we have a constant cross section, then you can sort of the end, start growth, end growth, that kind of thing. Obviously, all of these are pretty much there in front of you, self-explanatory. If we were to rotate that, you can see how it's twisting around now. You can go further than 360, make a wire type shape. There's mad stuff you can do with it, The sweep's a very powerful tool, as they all are. I use these all the time. I mean, I'm just kind of like, I can't get over how crazy and good this software is. So I think that covers everything. We've covered our subdivision surface model and our other spline based models, which obviously the subdivision surface is not, but I'm old school, so I consider it to be spline based because it's NURBS. So yeah, and I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial that I've put together to kind of introduce you to the basics. Next time, I'm not sure what we'll cover next time, but I'll have a think. And obviously, if you found this useful, just feel free to like and subscribe. If you found it boring, hit the dislike button. And have a wonderful 3D journey, and we will catch up on the next tutorial. All the best. Bye bye.